The open sky stretched endlessly above, a burning desert below, and between them, three shadows. Two masked foreign mercenaries flanked a man bound in handcuffs. Overhead, the crimson silence pressed down so heavily that even the dust seemed to hold its breath, frozen in suspended animation. The measured rhythm of footsteps continued their steady march across the wasteland. The guards stared straight ahead, their eyes fixed on some distant point on the horizon, but the prisoner, just for a moment, lifted his gaze skyward, as if reading some celestial omen written in the clouds. Within minutes, a finger moved to the radio. Static crackled through the speaker, then silence engulfed them once more. Above, a wide shadow passed, a drone, machine-like in its dispassionate surveillance, its camera eye watching everything below with cold precision. Those who had captured him believed this was routine procedure. Extract the target, ask no questions, leave no trace behind. But as they marched through the scorching valley, they began to realize this was a trap set for their own certainty, a snare designed to ensnare their confidence. The man made no struggle. He didn't cry out, didn't plead, didn't beg for mercy. He walked with a confident stride, shoulders squared, chin held high, as if the handcuffs were ornamental jewelry rather than instruments of bondage. The rifles surrounding him might as well have been wooden sticks. These hired fighters had come for foreign coins, one from Serbia, one from Belgium, bodies covered in tattoos, faces hardened by countless battles, yet they couldn't hide their fear. Especially when the radios fell silent and somewhere deep beneath the earth, they felt a faint tremor, like a whispered conversation in the bowels of the planet itself. They reached an open field near an abandoned fuel station. A fourth man stood there, wearing a white cap and holding a clipboard. He looked up, saw the red beret, and froze. He shouted, "Who told you to let him keep the hat?" No answer came. He approached closer, studied the face carefully. Then his eyes settled on the patch sewn onto the uniform, a silhouette of Africa breaking free from chains of oppression. His lips went dry. "Do you even know who this is?" he hissed. The Belgian mercenary muttered, "Some warlord." "What difference does it make?" The man with the clipboard ground his teeth. "This isn't just any leader. This is Ibrahim Traoré, the most protected man on this entire continent." The sentence hung in the air like a death sentence. The horizon flickered, not from heat but from movement. Dozens of small, glinting points began floating at low altitude. Not satellites, not birds, drones. They weren't armed, but they didn't need to be. Beneath each one hung a silent lens, all focused on the same scene, the man in handcuffs who should never have been captured. Then came the flood of messages. The phones of farmers, mechanics, nurses, and students began lighting up across the region. "They've touched our lion," the messages read. In European command rooms, alarms began sounding. At a NATO tower in Italy, an operator collapsed when the feed went black. In a Washington satellite room, a young analyst whispered hoarsely, "Sir, we need to recalibrate our threat matrix." In Ouagadougou, a mother told her child, "Don't worry. He told us this day might come, and he told us what to do." But those who held the keys to the handcuffs were the most helpless of all. Sweat beaded on one soldier's forehead like pearls. "We didn't sign up for this," he muttered under his breath. Another raised his rifle with a curse, but the prisoner smiled faintly. In a rough but confident voice, he said simply, "I told them I didn't need guns. I only needed patience." From that moment, the history of captive and captor changed forever. Across the sand dunes, rocky ledges, and whistling winds, countless eyes were watching. They knew now that they had touched Africa's lion, and lions don't remain in chains for long. In these very moments, beneath the layers of sand, that faint tremor grew stronger, as if the earth itself was bearing witness that the story was about to turn. In a Berlin government basement, beneath dim lighting, an analyst leaned over a frozen frame. "Run the facial recognition again," he commanded. The image was grainy, but the angle was precise. It was captured when they loaded him into the truck. The facial recognition system beeped. The screen flashed red. Ibrahim Traoré, head of state, Burkina Faso. Clearance, Black Alpha. Silence froze the room like ice spreading across a lake. The senior advisor asked slowly, "Are you certain?" "The badge, the beret, the hand scar, everything matches," came the reply. The answer lay in the evidence. Panic rippled from Brussels to Paris like an electrical current. Hotlines lit up like Christmas trees. Private jets began fueling. Behind closed doors, emergency sessions were convened with the urgency of wartime councils. Meanwhile, in the Sahara, the mercenaries' safe house pulsed with tension. Captain Niels Broker paced the command trailer like a caged animal, while on the other side, Marko Delov cleaned his weapons methodically. "This wasn't the mission we signed for," he said quietly. A young operative showed them his tablet. A new message flashed on a private forum: "Stand down, wrong target, high alert." Delov showed it to the commander. Broker ground his teeth. "We answer to command, not to all of Africa." Delov replied in a cold tone, "We answer to the truth first." Outside the tent, someone said, "We sent an emergency beacon. Why hasn't backup arrived?" The answer was silence once more. When the satellite feeds went dark, one by one, a new signature emerged on the black screens. Not NATO, not Russia, not America. The small text at the top changed everything. African Pantech Coalition. Live, uninterrupted. The camp technician stammered, "Sir, there's a new bird in orbit. Ghana, Nigeria, Rwanda, Burkina Faso, a joint project with no military tags." The commander asked, "Is it coming through our bands?" The analyst replied, "No, it's bouncing through mesh networks and mobile towers." On their own channels, a close-up view of the detention cell appeared on screen. Traoré looked up, meeting the camera's gaze as if addressing people sitting in their homes thousands of miles away. Rogue action by private contractors, but reality was slipping through their fingers like sand. In the French Ministry of Defense basement, General Savaraha roared, "Who leaked this?" The answer came. A child in Ouagadougou used her brother's phone. "The image reached Pan-African channels before we could intercept." The foreign minister whispered, "Issue a denial immediately." A young analyst interjected, "Sir, if this man dies in foreign custody, every university, every union will be in the streets. He's not just a politician, he's a symbol." The room fell silent. The threat was political, but it was also emotional, visceral. In the camp, Delov removed his helmet and threw it into the sand. "He's going to walk free," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Broker emerged from the tent. "You're finished," he said, gesturing to two soldiers. "Restrain him!" They stood motionless. Their rifles slowly lowered. Delov walked straight toward the detention cell. Traoré was already standing, calm in his eyes, a line of exhaustion on his lips. Delov unlocked the cell with the key he wasn't supposed to have. "I don't speak for any nation," he said quietly, "but I won't be the face of this mistake." Traoré responded, "Then you're freer than many people." The drone descended lower, its camera blinking, showing everything in real time, not just to Africa, but to the entire world. The line between captor and captive had been erased. Power no longer resided in the barrel of a rifle, but in the narrative's frame, and they had seized control of that frame themselves. In that moment, the world witnessed that silent dignity speaks far louder than thundering weapons. Beyond the camp's perimeter, there was slight movement in the sand. At first, the guard thought it might be a piece of desert brush blown by wind, but then he saw small flags waving. As they drew closer, it became clear. These were children. Village children with sun-scorched skin and bare feet. Among them, a girl walked at the very front, holding a tattered old flag bearing the green, red, and golden colors, now faded but unmistakable. This was the old flag of Burkina Faso, the same one raised during the first independence movement. The girl raised the flag high, and for a brief moment, the eyes of the prisoner inside the camp gleamed with recognition. This scene was being broadcast live. In homes, shops, and even hospitals, people were witnessing this moment. From Africa's countryside to its capitals, a single phrase echoed, "He is not alone." Some soldiers in the camp averted their eyes. One tried to light a cigarette, but his hands were shaking. Broker shouted at them harshly, "It's just a crowd of children. Why are you scared?" but even his own voice trembled with uncertainty. Inside the detention cell, Traoré stood calmly, his eyes fixed on the girl. For a moment he smiled faintly, as if remembering an old promise. Delave, who was now openly protecting him, approached and said, "These children would give their lives for you. Do you realize that?" Traoré said softly, "They didn't come for me. They came for themselves. They know that if I fall, their dreams will fall with me." During this time, protests erupted across African cities. In Nigeria, Ghana, Mali, and Senegal, people flooded the streets. They carried banners and mobile phones chanting, "Release our president!" In some places, soldiers joined the people, uniformed but unarmed. All of this was being broadcast live, and European channels were failing to suppress it. Inside the camp, pressure mounted. Delave, along with 3 other soldiers, decided to mutiny. They quietly began replacing guards so that when the opportunity arose, they could evacuate Traoré. When Broker grew suspicious, he lined everyone up and ordered, "Check your weapons." But at that very moment, a powerful sandstorm arose. The air filled with dust so thick that fingers held at arm's length disappeared from view. Soldiers scrambled to cover their eyes and mouths, and in this chaos, the mutineers reached Traoré's tent. In the storm, the girl holding the flag was now near the fence. She threw the flag upward and disappeared into the sand. Traoré caught the flag in his hands and said quietly, "Now is the time." Delave unlocked the cell and, with a few loyal soldiers, led him into the storm. Amid dust and noise, cameras were still capturing everything. This didn't look like an escape, it looked like a procession. He wasn't walking like a prisoner, but like a leader. Meanwhile, Broker stumbled out into the sand, screaming, "Stop them!" But his voice was swallowed by the storm. Across the world, millions watched on their screens as a man in handcuffs changed the course of history. In that moment, no one could believe this was happening without a single shot being fired. The storm's roar subsided, as if the Sahara had exhaled and fallen silent. But beneath the curtain of quiet, a tremor remained. Grains of sand continued sliding from tent canvases, settling on antennas, and forming a thin film over solar panels. Guards searched for each other and discovered that the sentry posted at the outer tower had vanished. No noise, no signs of struggle. Only empty boots remained, laces still tied. Someone called out nervously, "What's happening?" No answer came from anywhere. Delave, wiping dust from his face, noticed movement on the distant ridge. Shadows that didn't run but glided, changing the sand without leaving footprints behind. He told Broker, "We're surrounded, but the enemy isn't shouting. It's listening." Broker bristled with anger. "Stop trying to spread fear. Hold the line firm." But no one had broken the line. It was unraveling on its own. At that moment, a strange scene appeared on the dune facing the camp. The young girl who had disappeared into the bushes was now clearly visible. Behind her stood a few village elders, mothers, and young people, none carrying sticks, none holding stones. Just water jugs and weathered faces, across which thin lines of light streamed. The girl laid the flag on the ground, placed small stones at its 4 corners, and sat down silently. Those who sat with her also kept their mouths shut. Inside the camp, the clatter of weapons ceased. One soldier said quietly, "This isn't an attack. This is testimony." Above, the Pan-African feed split into 4 windows. In a rural school in Mali, children huddled around a small screen, whispering repeatedly, "He's alive." In an Accra factory, workers stopped their machines. One raised his hand in salute. In Dar es Salaam's market, someone had written in chalk, "We don't need orders. We are ready." At a Kigali university, a professor said, "We are listening, and we are standing." Broker ground his teeth and shouted, "Cut the generator, then cut the feed." The technician bowed his head. "Sir, this isn't our power, not our frequency. The more we try to stop it, the more it spreads." Delave repositioned the guard posts, moved some uncertain soldiers to the western side of the camp, and stood himself at the detention cell door. Inside, Traoré remained silent, but his eyes held not waiting. They held certainty. For the first time, he looked directly at Broker. "You have 2 paths," he said in a gentle voice. "Either walk with the truth or be buried in the same sand where lies are written." Broker exploded with rage. This is my camp! Outside, the wind whispered through invisible lips. This land belongs to no one. Whoever listens to it, it belongs to them. Suddenly, another screen lit up inside the communications truck. A rough voice spoke through an unknown broadcast. Directive to all private units. Operations on the western Sahel coast are suspended. Full stand down. Broker immediately dismissed it as a fake signal. But two men sitting behind him removed their headsets. One said, "I don't want to die for nothing." The second man opened his rifle, separated the magazine, and half-buried it in the sand. As the camaraderie disintegrated, Delov placed his hand on the lock. The lock had rusted during the previous storm, but was still functional. He opened it slowly. At that very moment, a thin line appeared on the horizon. 12 shadows sliding down from the ridge like the wind had changed direction. No one heard their arrival. No drone captured their image. They had come. No one gave them a name. But in stories, they were called the Black Wind, the unit that arrives silently and departs the same way. They didn't open fire. They simply completed the encirclement and suppressed the camp's noise with their own silence. Delov looked at the prisoner. Traoré nodded, as if this was the moment they had been waiting for. Outside, the girl ran her hand along the flag's edge and lifted her gaze. That simple gesture was enough for history to straighten its course. The news world recorded that moment in different languages with bated breath. In a Brussels basement, the pen fell from the general's hand. In Paris, behind closed doors, the foreign minister's voice broke. And in Rome, red text flashed on a screen, head of state. Visual confirmed in custody. Live feed open. Someone wrote, rogue contractors. Someone else added in bold, policy violation. Fake operation. But the sentences were weak because in the desert, a girl sitting silently was more powerful than any whitewashed explanation on paper. A NATO advisor said in a cold tone, "We didn't poke a bear. We pitched tents among lions." In the camp, Delov gave Broker one final explanation. "We should admit our mistake while we're still alive. We shouldn't become legends while we're dead." Broker laughed coldly. "And you'll make this African a hero?" In response, two armed soldiers standing behind Delov laid their rifles on the ground simultaneously. One said, "We've already made the hero ourselves." After handcuffing Broker, the lines of defeat deepened on his face. He fired a flare gun in rage. The red light dissolved into the dust. No helicopter came. No one responded. All around, there was only the measured rhythm of footsteps, those 12 footsteps that could be heard from every direction but never seen. Delov came to the cell door. As the lock's tongue slid inward, the sound was like pages turning in an old book. When Traoré emerged, he had neither the arrogance of a victor nor the hesitation of a prisoner, just a straight, purposeful stride. The girl bent down, picked up the flag, and held it forward. Traoré took it with both hands, shook off the sand, and with a slight nod, placed it across his shoulder. A nearby foreign soldier pulled his mask halfway, down. The same face that had said earlier, "I don't want to die for nothing," he said quietly. "We weren't told who you are." Traoré met his gaze. "You should have asked not who I am, but who I stand with." The soldier bowed his head. Above, the drone changed its angle. The frame widened. Outside the camp, there were now more people, some carrying water skins, some holding date branches, some with children on their shoulders. There were no voices, only the harmony of breathing. The Pan-African feed distributed another image split. In a Ouagadougou lab, young engineers were tightening the final bolt on a filter unit. In Niamey, women were completing the threading of cooperative cotton. On Lomé's coast, a fisherman was hammering nails into a broken boat. The caption beneath was simple. "Power is what builds." The stage was now set. Delov looked at Broker, who was still trapped in the delusion of giving orders. "You're finished," Broker spat. "Yes," Delov replied with satisfaction. "And that is my salvation." He raised his hand and signaled the remaining soldiers. "Put down your weapons. Clear the path." Some hesitated, but most laid down their rifles with relief. Two used cutters to open the cell's straps. A third unlatched the back gate and stepped aside. The sand shifted with a soft rustle as if the ground itself was making way. Traoré took a step forward. His shadow passed over the camp's fence and reached the feet of the seated crowd. The girl wanted to walk alongside him, but he stopped, adjusted the flag's crease, and took her hands in his. "Today, you showed leadership," he said. "I only followed behind." She didn't smile, just nodded and walked beside him as an equal. The 12 shadows on the ridge remained in place without moving. No slogans, no worship. Just a guarantee that the path would remain safe. In Brussels, the prepared draft was finally released. Regret over unauthorized actions by private elements. Review of operations in West Africa. Respect for regional autonomy. No names were mentioned. No explicit apology given. But behind the curtain, orders were in motion. Recall the contractors, clear the corridors, increase security perimeters around embassies. The media headlines read, "Europe retreats. Sahara advances." The reality was simpler than that. Silence had defeated noise. Outside the camp gate, Traoré stopped. He looked up at the drone's camera and said just one sentence, which was heard even without a microphone. "We didn't come to destroy. We came to build." Then he walked into the crowd. People made way. Some reached out to touch the flag, whose fibers had grown heavy with sweat and sand. Behind them, Delov lifted the cell's chains one last time and laid them on the sand, as if entrusting the memory of defeat to the earth. In the distance, somewhere a mosque's call to prayer sounded. Somewhere church bells rang, somewhere drums beat, all at once. Africa's own rhythm, and into that rhythm, a new melody had been woven. Power is that which can turn the tide of history with empty hands. The shadow of evening spread across the sea of sand. The sun's heat dimmed into a crimson sphere, but the pressure in the atmosphere did not lessen. The camp was now emptying. Barracks doors stood open, and those who had pointed rifles at each other just hours before now walked out shoulder to shoulder. There was no hurry in their steps, as if this were all part of a predetermined ritual. Traoré walked among the crowd, the flag still on his shoulder. An elderly soldier approaching from ahead reached out to touch a corner of the flag. "This is our mother," he said. "Don't let her bow." Traoré simply nodded in affirmation. The girl walked beside him, but now her eyes held less innocence and more of a strange dignity, the kind that comes not from age, but from surviving a great test. Delov followed from behind, his steps measuring the distance of Traoré's every stride, as if ensuring no further betrayal would come. He turned his neck to look back. The 12 shadows were still present, but their formation had changed. They now moved around the crowd's perimeter like a silent fortress. No one carried weapons, yet their footsteps carried a weight that pushed back anyone who approached. In the distance on the horizon, dust rose from a vehicle. As it drew near, people stopped. This wasn't an ordinary vehicle, an armored car with the blue emblem of the United Nations covered in grime. The vehicle stopped. A door opened and a middle-aged man stepped out, holding a white cloth and wearing confusion plainly on his face. He looked directly at Traoré and said, "I've come for reconciliation, to stop bloodshed." Traoré looked into his eyes and said quietly, "Bloodshed has already stopped here. But the one who sent you cannot see that." The man hesitated, then asked, "So what do you want?" Traoré, adjusting the flag's edge, replied, "We ask for nothing, only that our rights be given to us, and that you take your ears out of their pockets." Hearing this, a muffled murmur spread through the crowd, a silent affirmation deeper than any slogan. At this moment, Delov stepped forward and whispered something in the mediator's ear. The man startled, and his eyes rested on Traoré for a moment, as if realizing for the first time who he was standing before. He placed the white cloth on the ground and took a step back. "I understand," he said in a measured voice, then got back in his vehicle. The car kicked up dust, turned around, and vanished into the horizon. Now the camp's atmosphere had completely changed. In the cool evening breeze, there was a strange tranquility. Children came closer and gathered around Traoré. Some held his hand. Some touched the flag. An old woman came forward, wiped the dust from the flag with her scarf, and said, "This land is still breathing, son." "Don't let it suffocate," Traoré replied. "As long as we walk, this land will keep breathing." From afar, the faint beat of a drum could be heard. First one, then two, then the entire tribe's ensemble. The sound grew closer, joining with every step. People knew this wasn't a celebration of victory. It was a declaration that those returning from here would never come back in the same form. Delave turned back one last time to look at the camp. The chains that had secured the cell door still lay in the sand. He picked them up, weighed them in his hand for a moment, then threw them far away. The chains buried themselves halfway in the sand, as if the earth had absorbed the burden of an old crime. The crowd slowly turned toward the desert. Traoré was at the front, the girl beside him, and behind them, all those who had once been adversaries, but today walked in the same direction. At the edge of the sky, the evening's redness was turning to ink, but the footsteps moving across the sand carried news of a coming dawn. The night's darkness had spread completely, but the caravan's steps had not stopped. The stars in the sky seemed brighter than usual, as if they themselves were witnesses to this journey. The measured sound of feet on sand, the occasional cry of desert animals in the distance, and between them, that gentle breeze that, despite exhaustion, gave support to weary bodies. Traoré moved forward silently, the flag still in his hands, wrapped in a day's worth of sun and dust, but maintaining its dignity. Every person in the caravan was lost in their own thoughts. Some remembered scenes left behind, burned huts, broken buildings, people who couldn't return. Others wondered what lay ahead. The girl who walked with Traoré would sometimes look up at the stars, then bend down to play with the sand, as if certain this journey would end at a safe destination. Delave had now come close to Traoré. In a low voice, he said, "We stopped them today, but you know they'll come again." Traoré smiled faintly and replied, "They will come, certainly they will. But today they saw that we're not just marks on sand. We're carved in stone." Hearing these words, Delave bowed his head and quickened his pace, as if these words had sealed a determination in his heart. The caravan made camp in a small valley-like area. All around were high dunes creating a gentle rustling with the wind. People lit fires and sat down. Some silently gazed at the sky. Some spoke in low voices with each other. But on every face was a strange tranquility, perhaps knowing this moment was temporary but precious. Traoré sat apart for a while, kept the flag near him, and running his hand over the earth, began recalling past events. He remembered the day he first raised this flag. Back then, it wasn't just a piece of cloth, but a promise that he would never leave this land alone. Today, fulfilling that promise, he felt he wasn't alone. Behind him stood all those who stood for justice. At that very moment, an old hunter approached. An old rifle hung on his shoulder, and years of experience gleamed in his eyes. He sat before Traoré and said, "I've seen many wars in my life, but what I saw today was something else. You didn't just stop the enemy, you reignited that fire in people's hearts that had been extinguished for years." Traoré listened silently and then replied, "Keeping the fire burning, that is the real victory." The night deepened. The caravan's sentries took their positions on the dunes. The distant sound of drums still echoed, as if tribes were sending the message in their own way that they were awake. The girl, exhausted, had fallen asleep beside Traoré. Her face glowed in the moonlight, her breathing soft and rhythmic. Traoré gently placed his hand on her head, as if assuring her she was safe. Meanwhile, a shadow moved on the other side of the valley. A sentry immediately signaled, and several people moved in that direction. Upon approaching, they discovered it was a young man holding an old map. Breathless, he said, "This map shows the routes the enemy uses for supplies. If you block these, they won't be able to return here easily." Traoré took the map, glanced at it, then looked up at the sky and said, "Perhaps the night isn't over yet." A new determination now gleamed in his eyes, as if the next phase of the journey had begun at this very moment. the first ray of morning, hadn't fully descended on the sand when every member of the caravan was awakened. Behind the dunes, a golden light was spreading, and in the cool air, grains of sand seemed to dance in the illumination. Traoré pulled out the map he'd received last night from his pocket, opened it again, and gestured to his close companions. Several secret routes were marked on the map, which the enemy used for supplies and reinforcements. "We'll block these routes and show them this land is no longer open to them," Traoré said in a firm tone. The companions nodded in agreement and immediately began forming small groups to move forward. Each group was given a specific route to block. The path was long and difficult. Some places were rocky where feet could slip. Some areas were filled with soft sand that seemed determined to swallow those who walked on it. But with every step, one thought occupied the minds of the caravan's people. If these routes aren't blocked today, tomorrow the enemy will attack again, and this time we might not get the chance to repel them. As the first group reached a rocky gorge, they began dragging large boulders to pile across the path. The second group went to a valley and burned large wooden beams, spreading the debris to prevent any vehicle or animal from passing. The third group dug deep pits in the soft sand roots so that any approaching caravan would get stuck. During this time, Traoré himself stood at an elevated position with Delove and the young man who had brought the map. Traoré asked him, "How did you get these routes?" The young man hesitantly explained that he had previously worked as a laborer in enemy caravans, but he had seen with his own eyes how they destroyed innocent settlements. "I decided I wouldn't be part of them anymore," he said. "I made this map secretly." Traoré placed his hand on his shoulder and said, "You didn't just give us a map. You gave us new hope." In the distance, slight dust rose from the enemy's direction. It appeared they were advancing with a supply caravan, unaware of what awaited them. Traoré immediately signaled for everyone to take their positions. The caravans, people hid behind rocks and dunes, everyone holding their breath in anticipation. Within moments, 2 armored enemy vehicles and several trucks entered the gorge. As they moved forward, they encountered the obstacle of large boulders. The first vehicle stopped. The driver got out and began examining the route. Meanwhile, some expert archers from the caravan shot arrows lit with fire, which fell near the blockade and smoke began rising. The enemy soldiers ran around in panic. Delove looked at Traoré, but he raised his hand, signaling not to fire yet. "We want to send them a message, not create more bodies," Traoré said quietly. His purpose was to show the enemy that these areas were no longer safe for them, but bloodshed would be the last resort. The enemy caravan was forced to turn back. Their vehicles turned around and returned the way they came. The caravan's people looked at each other silently, but in their eyes was the quiet realization of victory. After this success, everyone gathered again. Traoré announced, "Today we didn't just block routes. We proved this land belongs to its people." An elderly member of the caravan said in response to his words, "Son, more important than blocking routes is keeping our hearts' doors open so that whoever wants to join this struggle can come." Traoré smiled and bowed his head. The sun had now fully spread, but there was a strange coolness in the atmosphere, the coolness felt in the heart after victory. Everyone knew the next step would bring them closer to the day when the enemy would have to leave this land. The afternoon sun had grown heavy with heat, but the caravan's steps were light. After blocking the enemy's supply routes, new courage had awakened within them. Traoré signaled the caravan to descend into a relatively safe valley so everyone could rest briefly before discussing the next strategic plan. As soon as they sat on blankets spread on the sand, water skins were passed around, and tired faces melted into momentary peace. But the tranquility didn't last long. A young guard who was keeping watch at the valley's entrance came rushing in, sweat on his face and warning gleaming in his eyes. "2 enemy spies have been spotted a few miles from here," he reported breathlessly. "They're mounted on camels and likely gathering information about our numbers and location before reporting back." Hearing this, commotion spread through the caravan. Traoré immediately stood and said, "If they make it back, today's victory will become worthless. We must stop them here." He selected 4 expert riders and set out with them himself. The path was difficult and filled with sand, but the caravan's horses were strong. Within minutes, they caught up to the spies. Traoré signaled for silence. Everyone slowed their horses' pace to approach and surround them quietly. As soon as the final distance broke, one rider moved forward and grabbed the camel's reins. Another rider positioned himself in front of the second spy. Both spies stopped in fright. Traoré asked in a stern tone, "Where are you going? And for whom are you carrying this information?" One spy's lips moved, but his words were broken. The other chose silence. Traoré decided to take them back to the caravan so their accounting could be done before everyone. Upon return, silence fell over the caravan. Everyone knew espionage meant death. But Traoré's temperament that day was strangely different. He stood both men before everyone and said, "These are the people who sell their own land to support the enemy. But today I won't kill them." Everyone was shocked. "Take their camels, confiscate their maps and documents, and send them back barefoot so they can go tell their masters that we are not to be feared." This decision was both harsh and strategic. It was necessary for the enemy to receive this message. The caravan possessed not just the ability to fight, but the capacity to think and act with calculated precision. After the spies departed, a new wave of determination surged through the caravan. As evening descended, Traoré ordered the caravan to move again. Their target now was an old fortress standing at the convergence of desert routes. It was said the enemy stored weapons and supplies there, but the fortress had been abandoned for years. Traoré's plan was to make this fortress their temporary command center. Along the way, signs of an approaching sandstorm became visible. There was a strange howling in the wind, as if the Sahara itself was preparing to test them. Traoré instructed the caravan to advance in groups so the danger of scattering in the storm would be minimized. When the storm hit, the sky's color changed to a dusty crimson, and grains of sand began cutting across faces like tiny blades. Horses and camels blinked repeatedly as they walked, but the caravan's people knew this was merely another trial of the journey, not just weather. Finally, when the storm subsided, the fortress came into view. In the setting sun's light, its walls bathed in golden and crimson hues. The caravan slowly approached. In every person's heart was the question, what story lay hidden behind these fortress walls? Hope or danger? Traoré turned one last time to look at his people and said, "This fortress is the beginning of our next battle, and perhaps also our greatest victory." Every member of the caravan internalized this message without a word. The next step would be decisive. Before the fortress's towering gate, the caravan slowed its pace. A thick layer of sand had accumulated beneath the door, as if no one had come here for many years. But in Traoré's heart was the certainty that this desolation was merely a disguise. He signaled 2 guards to position themselves on both sides of the gate. Then he pushed open the heavy wooden door and entered inside. Upon entering, everyone's eyes widened with astonishment. The fortress courtyard was indeed empty, but on one side, fresh footprints were clearly visible. Near a well close to the wall lay wooden crates with minimal dust covering them, meaning they had been placed recently. Traoré bent down and opened the lid of one crate. Inside were bullets and gunpowder. Another crate contained dried rations, water bottles, and maps. There was no doubt now that the enemy was using this fortress as a secret supply depot. Traoré ordered the caravan to immediately close and guard the fortress's inner gate. After that, he studied the maps carefully. They marked the enemy's next attack plans and supply routes. "This is the opportunity we've been searching for," Traoré said. "Every one of their moves is now before us." Some young men from the caravan suggested destroying all the supplies in the fortress. But Traoré shook his head. "No, we'll use these supplies. We'll answer the enemy with their own weapons." He decided the fortress would now be their temporary command center. From here, they would not only monitor the enemy's movements and plans, but also thwart their next attack before it happened. As night deepened, torches were lit on the fortress's high walls, and guards began their rounds. Young men sitting in the courtyard spoke in low voices, but in everyone's heart was the same question. Did the enemy know the caravan had reached here? A guard sitting near Traoré said, "Sir, if they find out, this fortress will be surrounded by morning." Traoré replied in a calm tone, "If they come, we're ready, and if they don't come, we'll go to them ourselves." At that very moment, another guard came inside. He reported that flickering lights had been spotted in the eastern direction not far from the fortress, as if someone had lit a fire. Traoré immediately sent some expert marksmen there to verify. After a while, news came that it was a small enemy camp, probably positioned to monitor the fortress. Traoré maintained silence for a moment, then said, "Let them stay there. Tomorrow they'll wonder what we're planning to do. Let fear become their first enemy." Throughout the night, unusual silence prevailed in the fortress, but the guards remained alert every moment. Somewhere in the distance, gusts of wind blew across the sand, and in the light of torches waving on the fortress walls, shadows danced. This silence was like the prelude to a coming storm. Before dawn, Traoré stood on the wall looking toward the east. A faint crimson glow was spreading across the sky, and there was a strange coolness in the air. In his hands were the enemy's maps, and in his eyes an unbreakable determination. He knew today would be decisive. Either the enemy would retreat, or this caravan would become immortal in history. He called down to the young men standing in the courtyard below. "Today we won't fight just for our protection. Today we fight for all those whose voices were buried in the earth." Every member of the caravan responded without sound. "We are ready." At that moment, the fortress's doors opened for a new journey. No one knew what lay ahead, but one thing was clear in everyone's heart. This wasn't just a battle, it was a message. And this message would surely reach the enemy's heart. Morning's first light had barely touched the fortress walls when activity began stirring throughout the compound. Traoré gathered his closest advisors in the main hall, a circular room with stone walls bearing the marks of countless battles from centuries past. He spread the captured maps across an ancient wooden table, its surface scarred with the initials of long-dead soldiers. Delove stood beside him, along with the young man who had brought the intelligence about the supply routes, and 3 tribal elders who had joined the caravan the previous night. "These maps show more than supply lines," Traoré said, his finger tracing a series of markings. "They show a pattern. The enemy moves in cycles, 3 days of preparation, 2 days of transport, 1 day of rest. They're predictable because they think we're disorganized." One of the elders, a man whose face was a road map of wrinkles earned under the Saharan sun, leaned forward. "In my grandfather's time there was a saying, 'The gazelle that knows the lion's path can drink in peace.' You've learned their path." Traoré nodded. "But knowing the path isn't enough. We must make the path dangerous for them while keeping it safe for our people." Delove pointed to a location on the map, a narrow canyon about 15 miles to the northeast. "This is their primary artery. Every major convoy passes through here. If we could establish a permanent presence—" "Not a blockade," Traoré interrupted. "A checkpoint. We're not bandits hiding in the desert. We're establishing legitimate authority over our own territory." The young intelligence gatherer spoke up, his voice gaining confidence. "Sir, there's something else. These markings here," he indicated a series of symbols near what appeared to be a town. "These are payment drops. They're buying cooperation from local officials." The room fell silent. This was a revelation that changed everything. The enemy's strength wasn't just military, it was financial, corrupting the very fabric of local governance. Traoré straightened, his mind working through the implications. "Then we must offer something they cannot: dignity. We won't match their bribes. We'll restore what money cannot buy: pride in one's own land." Over the next hours, a plan took shape. The caravan would split into 3 groups. The first, led by Delove, would establish the checkpoint in the canyon. not as an ambush but as an official station, complete with a flag and documented procedures. The second group would visit the towns marked on the map, speaking directly with the people about what was being done in their name. The third group, under Traoré's direct command, would remain at the fortress, transforming it from a secret depot into a visible symbol of authority. By midday, the plans were set in motion. Dalov's group departed first, taking with them some of the captured supplies, not to use the weapons, but to display them as evidence of what they had intercepted. They also carried something more powerful, printed leaflets. Created using a small portable press one of the caravan members had salvaged from a destroyed school. The leaflets were simple but profound. This checkpoint is maintained by the people. For the people. All legitimate travelers may pass, freely. Arms shipments and foreign interference will be documented and turned back. This land belongs to those who live on it. As Dalov's group disappeared into the heat shimmer, the girl who had carried the flag approached Traoré. She had been quiet since their arrival at the fortress, but her eyes had been watching everything, absorbing the lessons of leadership she was witnessing. "Why don't we just destroy the enemy's supplies?" she asked. "Why do we document and turn them back?" Traoré knelt to her eye level. "Because destruction is easy, but it teaches nothing. When we turn them back, they must explain to their superiors why they failed. When we document what we seize, the world sees proof of interference. Every action we take must serve two purposes: to protect our people and to reveal the truth." She nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her young eyes. The canyon Dalov's group reached was a natural fortress, high walls of striated rock on both sides, with only one path through wide enough for vehicles. It had clearly been used for centuries. Ancient petroglyphs adorned the walls, depicting caravans and travelers from ages past. Dalov positioned his people strategically. Rather than hiding, they set up in plain sight. A large flag was raised at the canyon's entrance, the red, green, and gold of Burkina Faso, but with one addition, a white stripe added by hand, symbolizing peace and legitimate authority. 4 men stood at the checkpoint itself, unarmed but wearing matching armbands made from strips of the same flag material. Behind them, positioned on the canyon walls but visible, were the armed members of the group, not threatening, but clearly present. The first test came before sunset. A convoy appeared on the horizon. 3 trucks, not military but civilian vehicles that had been repurposed. As they drew closer, the lead driver saw the checkpoint and slowed, confusion evident on his face. Dalov stepped forward, his hand raised in a stopping gesture, not a threatening one. The driver leaned out his window. "What is this?" "Who are you?" "This is a territorial checkpoint," Dalov replied in a clear, calm voice. "We're inspecting all cargo passing through this region." "What are you carrying?" The driver glanced back at the trucks behind him, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Supplies. Food and medicine for the villages." "Then you have nothing to worry about." "May we inspect your cargo to verify?" The driver hesitated, then nodded. 2 members of Dalov's group approached the first truck. They opened the back and found exactly what was claimed: bags of grain, crates of basic medical supplies. They documented the contents on a clipboard, took a photograph with an old digital camera, and stepped back. "You're free to pass," Dalov said, "but take this." He handed the driver one of the leaflets. "Show this at any checkpoint you encounter. It proves you've been inspected and cleared." The driver took the leaflet, stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at the flag waving above. Something shifted in his expression, a mixture of surprise, relief, and something else. Respect. This is how it should be," he said quietly. "Thank you." As the convoy passed through, one of Dalov's men approached him. "That was too easy." "That was a genuine supply run," Dalov replied. "The real test comes next." He was right. 2 hours later, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, another convoy appeared. This one was different, unmarked military vehicles, moving with the confidence of those who expect no resistance. Dalov took a deep breath and stepped forward again. His hand raised in the same stopping gesture. The convoy didn't slow. "Hold your positions," Delov said quietly to his team. "Don't fire unless fired upon." As the lead vehicle came within 50 meters, Delov stepped directly into its path. For a moment, it seemed the driver might simply run him down. But at the last second, brakes squealed, and the vehicle stopped. A man in civilian clothes but with military bearing stepped out, anger radiating from him. "Move aside, now. This is a territorial checkpoint," Delov repeated, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "We need to inspect your cargo." "You need to disappear before you get hurt," the man snarled. He reached for a sidearm at his belt. That's when the armed members of Delov's team on the canyon walls stood up, visible but not aiming their weapons. The message was clear. Escalation would not go well for anyone. The military man froze, his hand on his weapon. His eyes scanned the canyon walls, calculating odds. Behind Delov, the 4 unarmed checkpoint workers stood firm, not retreating an inch. A standoff hung in the air like the heat shimmer. Then something unexpected happened. One of the soldiers from the back of the convoy, younger than the others, stepped out of his vehicle and approached the officer. "Sir," he said quietly but firmly, "there are drones overhead. Everything we do here is being recorded." The officer's eyes flicked upward. He hadn't noticed, but the young soldier was right. High above, almost invisible against the bright sky, a small surveillance drone circled. The officer's jaw clenched. He was trapped by the new reality. This wasn't a hidden skirmish that could be denied later. This was documented, visible, undeniable. "What's in your trucks?" Delov asked again, his voice still calm. The officer didn't answer, but the young soldier did. "Weapons. Small arms and ammunition. Destined for a base near the border." Delov nodded slowly. "Then you need to turn around. This territory is no longer open for foreign weapons shipments. Your base will need to be supplied through official channels with proper documentation and governmental approval. You can't," the officer began. "We just did," Delov interrupted. "You can proceed with your weapons and create an international incident that will be documented and broadcast, or you can turn around and report to your superiors that the situation has changed. Your choice." The standoff continued for another minute. Then, with visible reluctance, the officer climbed back into his vehicle. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Delov agreed. "It's just beginning." The convoy executed a complicated turnaround in the narrow canyon and departed the way it came. As soon as they were out of sight, Delov's team erupted in quiet celebration. But Delov himself remained serious. "Document everything," he ordered. Times, vehicle descriptions, the soldier who spoke up, everything. "This information is as valuable as any weapon we could have captured." One of his team members approached with the camera. "I got it all." "Should we send it back to the fortress?" "No," Delov said. "Upload it directly to the Pan-African network. The world needs to see this happen peacefully, professionally. We're not rebels or insurgents. We're legitimate authority being exercised." As the sun set behind the canyon walls, the checkpoint's flag continued to wave in the evening breeze. It was no longer just a piece of cloth. It was a declaration that had been tested and proven. While Delov secured the canyon, the second group, led by a woman named Amara, who had joined the caravan 2 days earlier, entered the first of the marked towns. She had been a teacher before the conflict, and she understood something crucial. Minds were harder to change than routes on a map. But once changed, they stayed changed. The town was small, maybe 300 people, clustered around a well that had sustained life there for generations. As the group entered, curtains twitched in windows, and people watched with the wariness of those who had seen too many armed groups pass through. But Amara's group wasn't armed. They carried water, some of the captured medical supplies, and most importantly, they carried respect. Amara called out in the local dialect, "We seek the elder council. We come to speak, not to demand." Slowly, cautiously, people emerged. An old man, bent with age but sharp-eyed, approached. "More soldiers?" "No, grandfather," Amara replied, using the respectful term. "Citizens. We're establishing civilian authority over our own territories. We came to ask if you've been approached by foreign contractors offering money for cooperation." The old man's eyes narrowed. Then he spat into the dust. "Money. Yes. Blood money to look the other way while they move weapons through our land. Did you take it?" The old man's face flushed with anger. "What choice did we have?" "They said cooperate or face consequences. We're farmers, not fighters." Amara nodded with understanding, not judgment. "Then your cooperation was survival, not betrayal. We don't blame you. But now you have a choice," she gestured, and her team began unloading supplies. "This is yours, no strings attached. But more than supplies, we offer you something else, documentation. We will document every approach made by foreign contractors, every bribe offered, every threat made. This documentation will be sent to international observers, to continental bodies, to anyone who will listen." A younger man, perhaps the old man's son, stepped forward. "Why would they care? They've ignored us for decades." "Because," Amara replied, "now there's proof. Now there are witnesses willing to speak. And now, most importantly, there's an alternative authority to turn to. You're not alone anymore." She pulled out a satellite phone, one of the items salvaged from the fortress. "This connects directly to our command center. If contractors return, if you're threatened, if you need help, you call. Someone will answer. Someone will come." The old man took the phone with trembling hands, staring at it as if it were a talisman. "Who are you people?" "We're you," Amara said simply. "We're everyone who's tired of outsiders deciding our fate. We're claiming what's ours, our land, our future, our dignity." That evening, as Amara's group prepared to move to the next town, people from the village brought food, not much, but what they could spare. An offering of solidarity, not payment. The old man approached Amara one more time. "That flag you carry, I remember when it first flew. I was a boy. We thought we were free then." "We were," Amara replied, "and then we forgot. But some things once remembered can never be forgotten again." Back at the fortress, Traoré oversaw a transformation that was both practical and symbolic. The courtyard, once a secret storage depot, was being converted into a public space. The captured weapons were cataloged and stored, but not hidden. Instead, they were displayed in a locked but visible room with glass windows installed in the door. A sign above the door read, "Intercepted armaments, evidence of foreign interference." The medical supplies were organized into a field clinic staffed by a doctor and 2 nurses who had joined the caravan. They began treating anyone who came, caravan members, villagers from nearby even, controversially, a pair of enemy soldiers who had been injured in a vehicle accident and stumbled to the fortress seeking help. When some of the caravan members objected to treating enemy soldiers, Traoré was firm. "We treat them, document their treatment, and send them back with a message. We are not savages. We are civilization reclaiming itself." The fortress's main hall was converted into a communications center. Using equipment salvaged and some donated by supporters monitoring the Pan-African feeds, they established reliable connectivity. Messages began flowing in, support from across the continent, offers of supplies, requests for guidance from other communities wanting to establish their own checkpoints and civilian authority. Most significantly, international journalists began requesting access. Traoré granted it selectively with conditions. They could document everything. But they couldn't endanger ongoing operations by revealing locations or specific security measures. A French journalist, a woman named Claire Dubois, who had covered African affairs for 2 decades, was one of the first to arrive. She entered the fortress with visible skepticism, expecting another warlord with grandiose claims. What she found instead made her reconsider everything she thought she knew about conflict in the region. "You're treating enemy wounded?" she asked Traoré, her camera operator filming the exchange. "We're treating wounded human beings," he corrected. "The concept of enemy is temporary. The concept of humanity is permanent. But you're also blocking their supply routes, establishing armed checkpoints." "We're exercising territorial authority," Traoré interrupted calmly. "Tell me, if your country discovered foreign military contractors were moving weapons through your territory without authorization, what would your government do?" Claire hesitated. "They'd stop them," Exactly. We're doing what any legitimate authority does, controlling our own territory, protecting our own people, and doing it with as little violence as possible. The question isn't why we're doing this. The question is why the international community finds it surprising that we would. That exchange, broadcast across multiple networks, began shifting the narrative. What had been portrayed as an insurgency or rebellion was being reframed as something more fundamental: self-determination. But not everyone was ready to accept the new reality. In a secure command center 200 miles away, a very different meeting was taking place. Contractors, military advisors, and political operatives from 3 different nations gathered around a conference table, watching the same feeds that the rest of the world saw. "This is getting out of control," an American advisor said, his face tight with frustration. "They've established what amounts to a parallel government." "Not parallel," a French intelligence officer corrected. "Legitimate. Traoré is the recognized head of state. Technically, he's not rebelling against authority. He is the authority." "Then we need to delegitimize him," the American replied. "Too late," said a woman representing a private military corporation. "The Pan-African network has millions of viewers. Every heavy-handed move we make gets broadcast in real time. We've lost the information war." "Then we adapt," said a man who hadn't spoken. Yet, a British consultant specializing in what was euphemistically called complex political environments. "We can't confront him directly anymore, but we can isolate him. Cut off supplies, impose sanctions, make the cost of support too high for his allies." "He's not getting supplies from us," the French officer noted. "He's using captured materials and local support. Traditional pressure points don't apply?" The American leaned back, thinking. "Then we target the support. Make examples of towns that cooperate with him. Not militarily, economically. Cut off aid, freeze development funds." "That will backfire," the British consultant said. "It'll prove everything he's been saying about foreign interference. You'll turn him into a martyr and galvanize even more support." The meeting continued for hours, but no consensus emerged. The traditional playbook for managing African affairs simply didn't apply to a situation where every action was documented and broadcast, where the insurgent was actually the legitimate government, and where military superiority meant nothing if it couldn't be exercised without creating international incidents. Finally, the most senior person in the room, a general who had overseen operations across 3 continents, spoke up. "Gentlemen, lady, I think we need to consider that we may have already lost. Not the military conflict, we could win that in a week if we committed resources. But the larger battle, the battle for legitimacy, for narrative control, for the future of the region, Traoré isn't defeating us with weapons. He's defeating us with cameras and principles." The room fell silent. "So what do you recommend?" the American finally asked. "I recommend we begin negotiating our withdrawal while we still have some bargaining chips. If we wait until we're forced out, we lose everything. If we negotiate now, we can at least preserve some economic interests, some diplomatic relationships." "That's surrender?" someone objected. "No," the general replied. "That's recognizing reality before reality forces itself upon us." As these discussions happened in distant command centers, life at the fortress had settled into a new rhythm. Evening had fallen, and across the courtyard, small fires burned where people gathered to share meals and stories. Traoré sat slightly apart, the girl who had carried the flag beside him. She had barely left his side since their arrival, and he had come to see her as a symbol of what they were fighting for. Not just territory or resources, but the future itself. "Do you think they'll attack?" she asked quietly, watching the flames dance. "Eventually," Traoré replied honestly. "But not the way they used to. Every move they make now has witnesses. They've lost the luxury of operating in shadows. Then we've won." Traoré smiled sadly. "We've won a battle. The war, the real war, that's much longer. Because the war isn't against them. It's against the idea that some people have the right to determine the fate of others. That idea has existed for centuries. It won't die easily." The girl was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she asked, "What happens to me? When this is over? What do you want to happen?" "I want to go to school. A real school, not one in a building with no roof and books from 20 years ago. I want to learn things. Important things. Like what? Like how to keep this from happening again. Like how to build things that last longer than wars. Traoré put his hand on her shoulder. Then that's what you'll do, and someday you'll teach others. And the cycle will continue, but better each time. That's how we truly win. Across the courtyard, Delov had returned from the checkpoint, bringing news of their successful standoff. He approached Traoré, his face showing exhaustion but satisfaction. "The checkpoint holds," he reported. "We turned back a weapons convoy without firing a shot. It's working. Any casualties?" "None, not even injuries. The most violent thing that happened was some very creative cursing in 3 languages." Traoré laughed, a sound that drew attention from around the courtyard because it was so rare. "Good, document everything. Make sure it all goes into the record." "Already done. Claire Dubois wants an interview with you tomorrow. She's calling this the Dignity Revolution. Says it's the first time she's covered a conflict where the goal isn't to defeat the enemy, but to make enmity irrelevant." "She's perceptive," Traoré acknowledged. "Grant the interview, but I want representatives of the villages there too. This isn't about me, it's about all of us." As the night deepened, a message came through on the satellite phone. It was from the capital, from officials who had fled during the initial coup attempt that had forced Traoré into the desert. They wanted to negotiate, to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution. Traoré read the message twice, then called his inner circle together, Delov, Amara, who had returned from the towns, the tribal elders, and several of the younger members who had shown leadership potential. "They want to talk," he announced. "Is it a trap?" someone asked. "Probably," Delov said. "Or at best, a stalling tactic while they regroup." "Then we don't go," another voice suggested. But Traoré shook his head. "No, we go, because even if it's a trap, the world is watching. Every step we take must be toward peace, toward legitimacy, toward the future. If they're offering dialogue, we accept. But on our terms, in a neutral location with full documentation. And if it really is a trap?" Traoré smiled grimly. "Then they'll spring it in front of cameras broadcasting to millions of people. That's a trap that catches the one who sets it." The meeting continued late into the night, planning the logistics of a negotiation that might never happen honestly, but had to be approached as if it would. 3 weeks later, Claire Dubois stood in what had once been an abandoned fuel station, the same place where Traoré had first been held in handcuffs, and filed her final report. "What started as a capture," she said to the camera, "the desert wind whipping her hair, has become something unprecedented. Not a revolution in the traditional sense, but a reclamation. The footage behind me shows the transformation." The camera panned to show the renovated station, now serving as a community center. Solar panels on the roof, a school in one building, a medical clinic in another. The flag, that same tattered flag carried by a young girl flying from a proper flagpole. "The negotiations in the capital are ongoing," Claire continued, "but in many ways they're irrelevant. The real change happened here, in the desert, when people decided they wouldn't wait for permission to reclaim their own dignity." She paused, consulting her notes. "In the 3 weeks since the checkpoint was established, not a single shot has been fired. 47 weapons shipments have been turned back. 32 communities have established their own civilian authority councils. And most remarkably, international contractors have begun withdrawing, not because they were defeated militarily, but because they became irrelevant." The camera moved to show Traoré in the distance, speaking with a group of villagers, the young girl still at his side. "The question now," Claire concluded, "is whether this model can sustain itself. Whether what worked in the Sahara can translate to other regions, other conflicts. The world is watching, and what they're seeing is that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a weapon at all. It's the simple refusal to accept that things cannot change." She signed off, and the broadcast ended. But the story, of course, was just beginning. In the fortress courtyard that evening, as the sun set and painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Traoré stood on the wall one last time. Behind him, the compound bustled with life. Not the nervous energy of a military encampment, but the purposeful activity of a community building something meant to last. The girl climbed up to join him. "They're saying we won," she said. "We survived," Traoré corrected gently. "Winning is what we do next. Winning is building something so strong that it doesn't need warriors to protect it. It protects itself through justice and shared purpose. That's harder than fighting. Much harder," he agreed. "Fighting ends. Building never does." They stood together in silence as the last light faded from the sky, and across the desert, in dozens of villages and towns, similar conversations were happening. The old certainties had been challenged. The old powers had been revealed as less powerful than they appeared, and in the space that uncertainty created, something new was growing, fragile still, untested in many ways, but undeniably real. The desert had borne witness to countless empires rise and fall over millennia. It had seen conquerors come and go, borders drawn and redrawn, powers claim dominion that lasted mere moments in geological time. But perhaps this time, it was witnessing something that might actually last. People claiming not dominion over others, but sovereignty over themselves. The night deepened. Stars emerged in their millions, and the desert, ancient, patient, eternal, waited to see what dawn would bring. The end.